Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is once again that time of the week. Oh, what time of week is it, ladies and gentlemen? Well, it is that time of the week where we dig underneath the headlines. We power through all the malarkey and propaganda that's being thrown your way. Call out the establishment on its BS. It is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. Bring on local politicians, activists, discuss issues that are national, local in nature, etc., etc. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM, WIDR Kalamazoo, or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may be. So today, we are continuing our congressional candidate series with Mr. Rich Eichholz. Please introduce yourselves to the folks at home.
Hey everyone, this is Rich Eichholz. I'm a candidate for U.S. Congress here in Southwest Michigan.
All right, great. And the way this kind of works, we're mostly just going to be here asking you about your stance on the issues. I'm going to defer. Lawrence, do you got some juicy questions to ask the candidate here?
I mean, we're gonna do what most journalists don't do when they have a politician in the room. We're gonna talk about policy.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us.
Sure.
Thank you for joining us. Now, I previously looked up some of your stances, and I saw the conversation that you had with the council. It was the candidates council meeting.
Talking about the forum?
The forum?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one in Niles, or?
I don't know.
Might have been the one in Pawpaw.
It might have been. It was in February. That's the only one I saw.
Okay, that was the one in Pawpaw.
Yeah. I mean, there was some really interesting stances on that everybody had. I would like to ask you, first of all, the first and biggest question is about money in politics. Money in politics is the
root. I'd say it is the gatekeeping issue that keeps all other issues locked behind its doors.
Basically, it is the issue that transcends everything, and it's the main reason why things are a problem in this country. Well,
I think we saw it in the tax scam that came through at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Wildly unpopular everywhere, but it just kept driving forward and forward and forward. And why was that? Because the Republicans were responding to their donors, and that's all that it was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So my question for you is, what's your campaign? Are you taking corporate PAC money? Are you taking super PAC money? Are you taking big donor money?
We are not taking any corporate PAC money or any kind of blind PAC money whatsoever. We will, of course, be applying to various things such as the United Auto Workers, Sierra Club, those kinds of organizations. But that's all we'll do. Otherwise, it's completely individual donors.
So, and how do you, like, for those who do not know you, like for those who are not political junkies like us, what are a few key things that's a part of your campaign that you're running on? Like if you had to give a quick...
Yeah. So the main focus of my campaign is basically building a 21st century economy. And for me, that means an economy that works for everyone. That's rural areas, urban areas, small businesses, struggling households, everyone. Otherwise, as we leave people behind, not only is it unfair and unjust, it actually is bad for the economy because it ends up just being a drag on the economy. But also an economy that protects the planet and provides for universal health care, because I see all of those as being critical to having a vibrant economy and vibrant communities in this district.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. There is a Martin Luther King brought up a thing about universal basic income, and they're actually doing that in some progressive states. They're doing that in California. They have a system of universal income in other countries, in other European countries, and the data has shown that it has lifted the poor and disenfranchised in a faster way. Like it has boosted the living standard of the countries that have done it. Is that something that you're also for, or is that something that, or are you more along the lines of you're for just a living wage, or what's your stance on?
Yeah, I don't think at this point I would say that I would be in favor of a universal basic income. I'm interested in it. I think it's a interesting concept. I've done some calculations, and we can actually get surprisingly close to it without changing our tax structure. But I think it's a long political road to hoe. And in the meantime, we've got people who are really suffering, and I think there are more practical things that we can do to move forward, more politically practical things.
So what would be some of those political?
So I think a living wage that is indexed to inflation and indexed to the area of the country where people are living, because you can live on $15 an hour in some places, and in some places you can't. And so I think a living wage is certainly critical. I think rebuilding our unions, because they've been decimated over the last 50 years. For the last 50 years, we've been basically pushing money away from wages over to the profit side, and that's great for entrepreneurs because they're inspired to form companies. They've got money to invest. But then what do they have money to invest in? They have money to invest in businesses for which there's no one who has products. So there's no one who has the money to buy the products and services. So actually it doesn't work. What we really need is to make sure that we have a balance between profits and wages, so that as the businesses are thriving, so are the employees, and the employees can participate in the economy fully.
Well, okay, when you say an economy that's tied to inflation now...
Sorry, just not the economy, but the wage.
The wages that's tied to inflation. And for those that are viewers that are listening, if the minimum wage was tied to inflation right now, the average American would have between $18 and $20 an hour.
If are you going back to the 1930s when it was established?
No, I'm going back to the point in the 1960s where productivity and wages split, and it just stayed with inflation. If the medium income was just stayed with inflation, the same way that our productivity and inflation.
Yeah, I was just asking what the base. You're going back to the 60s for that. Yeah.
I mean, in most modern countries, in most modern areas, in America, you can't get an apartment if you don't make $17 an hour, and that's most places in America. And so to have a minimum wage that's $18 an hour or $20 an hour, which is what it would be if we kept up with inflation, that would help millions of Americans to get out of the struggle bus where they're at right now. I mean, it makes sense.
Absolutely. So I mean, just 3 weeks ago, I was knocking on the door here in Kalamazoo, and no one was there, or didn't seem anyone was there, and all of a sudden I'm walking away, and then Marvin comes running out, and he stops me, and he wants to know why I was there and so forth, and he's telling me a little bit about himself. He's a single dad, 2 kids. He's making $9.25 an hour, and then he kind of looks at his house, and he's kind of, I can see in his eyes that he's a little ashamed, and I'm like, what are you talking about, or what's the problem? And he said, well, I've been trying to get funding for putting on siding in the house from a program here in Kalamazoo, but I can't seem to get the program to work for me. And I'm just sitting there thinking, well, yeah, but if you were making a living wage, you wouldn't have to be chasing down a program. So I think, getting to the living wage to whatever it needs to be in whatever area is certainly critical. And I'll just tell you, I think a lot of people are not familiar with this simple fact. In the 30s, when the minimum wage was established, the Democratic Party had the opportunity to index it to inflation. It was completely in their control. They could have done it. So you'd say, well, why didn't they do it? It was a political game. They thought that they could every once in a while just raise the minimum wage, and then they would get some more votes. So it's just too cute by half. And so basically we've been stuck with that. And you're correct that the major diversion started in about the 60s, and it's about the last 5 decades when we've made a whole bunch of policy decisions, one after another, just keeps pushing money away from wages over to profits, and we have to start returning that. Now, the wonderful thing about economies is that they respond to small positive changes. So do we have to do it overnight? Well, I would love to do it overnight so that everyone, would be able to go to bed at night knowing that they've got the bills paid and so forth. But that's probably going to be quite hard to do. But if we get it moving back and we just keep pushing at it, we'll get there, and it'll actually drive the economy, and people will be able to improve their standard of living more rapidly than you might otherwise think.
I personally am not for gradualism, but that'd be
I understand it.
That's a conversation. That's a conversation we can have another time.
Yeah, but there's an issue with the Congressional Budget Office did an analysis of how many jobs would be lost at $15 an hour. If the minimum wage everywhere was $15 an hour, so that's 500,000 jobs that would have been lost. That's nothing to sneeze at. But that doesn't mean that you don't raise the minimum wage. That means you figure out how to do it. Okay, and that what some people have taken is, now we can't raise the minimum wage. That's not my answer, right? The answer is, okay, we have to be aware that if we just point blank raise it to $15 an hour everywhere right now, there's going to be a lot of people and a lot of businesses that are hurting. So we have to take that into account, and we have to move it forward. But so the danger of gradualism is you do the first step and you never do the rest, right? So, but that's where it takes consistent activism outside of the political parties and within the political parties to keep the pressure on, to keep it moving.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Just it raised a really interesting question to me, because this is something I thought about in the context of a living wage. So I think a lot of people, when you're talking about the disparity between productivity and profit, we're thinking of like large corporations. By all means, corporations like Amazon, McDonald's, etc., they could pay their workers $17, $18 an hour, and it wouldn't, bankrupt them by any means. Of course, when you're talking about a smaller business that has smaller margins, that's a much more difficult task. So I'm wondering, is that kind of what you have in mind with that?
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? So those are the jobs that would be lost in the smaller businesses. We've been going around to small businesses for the last 3 months in particular, visiting them all over the district. And honestly, I'm nothing but impressed with the small business owners in this district. They are dedicated not only to their businesses, but to their employees. They're really trying to do the right thing by them. But, for them to suddenly have to pay, twice as much or even 50% more to their workers, that would really put them in a bind. So, but that doesn't mean that we don't get it there, right?
So I'm curious.
That we have to figure out how to do it.
Have you thought about like possible legislative solutions to that? Some way that you can increase that living wage without causing inordinate harm to small or struggling businesses? Yeah,
so I think there's two things to consider, and one is pretty basic, and that is that you just agree that it's going to take 3 to 5 years, and so you set up a schedule so that everyone knows, right? The employer knows where they're going to have to get to, and they're going to have to figure out a way to raise prices and and increase productivity and whatever it's going to take for them to be able to do it. But the other argument is that maybe we should be thinking about a way to support those businesses as they're doing it. I mean, it's in France, they really wanted corner bakeries, right? So the French government, because that's culturally important to them, right? Mm-hmm. So the French government supported them financially to be able to continue to withstand the economic throes that they were in. And so if small businesses are important to us, and they are, then maybe they need some kind of help. But the real issue here is not the kind of classical small business definitions where, okay, there's only 5 employees, but they're doing huge financial transactions and they're just making millions of dollars. I'm talking about figuring out a way, because I don't think it's legislatively easy but I'm sure there's a way to actually define a small business so that it's actually a small business.
I mean, one way to help out businesses and help out our economy, in my personal opinion, from when I looked it up, is having universal health care so that businesses are not paying half of their profit margin or half of their equity is going to healthcare. If we had universal healthcare, that would take care of a lot of the load on businesses. And also legalizing, decriminalizing, and taxating marijuana, which would bring a $10 billion industry overnight, which we saw in California and we saw in Nevada, that they had a multi-billion-dollar industry be created overnight, and it brought tremendous amount of money to their economy. So much so that Nevada had to have a state of emergency because they ran out of marijuana.
I'll just take those two separately because they're really separate. First of all, universal health care. I've got 30 years of experience in the healthcare business worldwide, here in the United States, in Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And as you've kind of alluded to, or at least in the back of your mind, I think, is the simple fact that the rest of the developed world has better health outcomes than we do, and at half the cost. And the difference is universal health care. Now, when I say universal health care, I simply mean that everybody has health care. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's all government-run insurance at all. There's actually only 3 countries in the world that have truly single-payer insurance, and the UK, Canada, and Taiwan. And beyond that, all the other countries have a mixture of government-run insurance and private insurance, all the way to the most extreme, which is Switzerland, which basically has no government insurance whatsoever. It's all private insurance. But the real difference is, and I'm working with insurers all over the world, I've seen the difference in the calculation. Once all the insurers know that all of the patients are covered all the time, then they make different calculations about whether or not it's a good, economically sound idea to pay for treatment this year rather than wait to see what happens 2 years from now. In the United States, insurers do the rational thing. They consider whether or not that patient is probabilistically going to be their patient in 2 years. If they determine that it's not, that patient is not going to be theirs responsibility, then the incentive to provide them the treatment that they need this year in order to avoid the treatment from 2 years from now, that's not there, right? And so that's why we get into the nightmare that we have without having universal health care. So that's why I tell you that, part of a 21st century economy for me is absolutely having universal health care.
So just to clarify, so do you make a distinction? There's the bill for Medicare for all, and if you don't support that, exactly what are the weaknesses of that, and what kind of system needs to be built better so that profit incentive is no longer part of our healthcare system?
Just to be clear, the bill that's in Congress is John Connor's bill.
You
have the bill that Bernie Sanders
in the House.
Yeah, that's the bill that's in the House, and then you have Bernie Sanders Medicare for All bill that's in the Senate. Mm-hmm. Since you're running to be in the House, would you sign on to that bill, or if you would not, what would you want the bill to be like before you sign on it?
I'm much more, and this won't sit right with you, much more about a more incrementalist point of view. I think the next step that I would take would be to get a public option on the exchanges. All right, so that sounds like, well, that's just more government insurance, right? But actually, what it actually does is enable us to offer to the marketplace a standard by which the private insurers have to live up to, both in terms of premiums and services, and then you can take the regulatory issues out of it, because they're just responding to normal market pressures, which is something that they're used to responding to, and so that would actually give more people health care, and it would revitalize the private insurance industry to be more efficient.
I mean, Okay, so is the public option better than universal health care? Like in the town hall that Bernie Sanders had, and they based in when it came to Medicare for all, if we just dropped the number of Medicare to 0 for everybody, we would not have to spend a dime more that we spend now on Medicare, and everybody would be covered. Now, is a public option better than what we have? Yes, and I absolutely agree with that. I actually don't have a problem with the public option. In my opinion, I was really pissed when they threw the public option under the bus when the Democrats had
back in
me too. About 3 a.m. actually. I remember screaming at the television because I thought there was a moment in time about 3 a.m. when they could have pushed it through, and they backed off.
I mean, it's the same thing that they're doing with DACA right now. Like they were like, we're gonna fight for DACA. Oh, there's the bus. And now you're under the bus.
So is it better? I think so. My problem, quote unquote, with Medicare for all is simply that I think it's politically impractical, and I meet way too many people that are suffering way too much to destroy the good for trying to get at the perfect, basically, and I don't think we're going to get there to Medicare for all, and certainly not in a straight pathway, and certainly not anytime soon. And I can't look at people in the eye and say to them, I'm going to support Medicare for all, and if we don't get Medicare for all, then we'll have what we have. I think we have to just keep moving forward, and that means not just the public option, but it means expanding Medicaid. It means expanding CHIP. It also means making room in our marketplace for more charitable or hospitalization programs. That's a big part in, for instance, Germany, and so it could play a role here as well. If you look at the different systems, the one that I think we would probably be able to get to the quickest is something similar to Germany, which is really just a patchwork of different kinds of healthcare coverages. And you look at it and you go, oh, people will fall through the cracks. And the reason they don't is that there's just so many patchworks that something catches everyone. And I don't know that we'll have the same collection of patchworks, but if we can get enough patchworks, then everyone will get covered.
Okay, and I'm gonna push back against you. I agree with about 85% of what you said. On some extent, I'm going to push back a little bit.
I'm honored to. 85 is pretty good.
I mean, Quinnipiac polling came out and it showed that 60% of Americans wanted universal health care, and that's Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. A plurality of Republicans now want universal health care. In that same article, they showed that it was 47% to 38% of Republicans want Medicare for all. So I think it's closer than you think, like in that aspect. But I have no problem with someone who has a backup plan to a backup plan. So if you are fighting for universal health care, you can't get universal health care, then you're going to fight for a public option, because that also has over 65% of approval rating. I think it was Pew Research polling that just came out, and the public option also has over 60% of Americans that support it as well. The other thing that I wanted to talk about besides Medicare was marijuana, because we live in a medical marijuana state. And there has been a lot of push for the decriminalization and legalization and regulation of marijuana. And I wanted to get your stance on that.
Yep. So I believe that the states and local municipalities are taking the lead on this. And I think we have a really untenable situation in which the federal government is, trying to put people in jail for things that the local city is trying to encourage people to do. So I think we make the major thing from a federal point of view is that we need to harmonize the federal regulations and laws with the state and local, and let the state and local take the lead.
Okay. Now, as much as you say that you want them to take the lead, if you were to represent the 6, what would like? Are you for the regular, like the type of regulations and that they have in like California or Nevada, or what would your ideal? Yes, excuse me. I can't talk right now. Ideal legislation look like?
Yep. So just a little bit of background about myself. I'm on the board of a major nonprofit alcohol and drug abuse treatment program. It's something that's really important to me. I take everything to do with drugs and alcohol is a drug, very seriously.
Oh, yes.
If you look, I've heard, even over the weekend, I heard somebody refer to the idea of marijuana being on Schedule 1 as ridiculous.
Because it is.
It's not actually ridiculous if you just look at the literal definition of what's a Schedule 1 drug is, and you take it quite literally. But what might be ridiculous is letting the fact that it's on Schedule 1 determine what we're going to do about it. Because that's where the problem comes. And honestly, that's why I think it has to be letting the state and local governments take the lead on it. I would not be pushing for legalization from a federal perspective, but I think I'm totally on board with the states and local taking initiative and going with it.
Would you be like as Jeff Sessions is cracking down on more dispensaries and things like that?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? So I mean, we can't have the federal government stepping in and saying, we don't agree with you and we're going to put you in jail. I mean, that's what we have to make sure we're stopping.
All right, I'd say unless you had something else in mind, Lawrence, do you want to maybe we take a quick break and then go to some foreign policy questions?
Hey, we can do that.
All right.
We can do that.
Right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Alvan Humane Society is a non-for-profit, no-kill animal shelter that has been serving Allegan, Van Buren, and surrounding areas for almost 50 years. They are hosting their CARES Fund Drive and are over halfway to their $500,000 goal. Alvan can currently house around 30 dogs and 100 cats. Money raised from the CARES campaign will go to build a new shelter, which will expand this capacity by 20%. Alvan Humane Society has 20 dogs and 40 cats that are microchipped, spayed and neutered, and fully vaccinated, ready for adoption right now. To adopt a pet, donate to the CARES Fund Drive, or find out more, feel free to visit them on the web at www.al-van.org.
Are you trying to get your local Kalamazoo business name out to the WMU and Greater Kalamazoo communities? Why not do so while supporting Radio Evolution through underwriting and donations? For more information, please visit widrfm.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR. We are joined by congressional candidate Rich Eichholz. He's in the hot seat right now. We've been asking him some policy questions.
I would like to ask one quick thing. And I'll just say one quick thing.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Anybody but Fred Upton. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Like, that's a question that I wanted to ask you. What is it about 5 Nights at Fred Upton? What is it about him that made you say, nah, I need to run against him. We need to get him out of the seat. What is it? What was it?
So the main thing that really started me was in 2010 when he became chairman of Energy and Commerce.
Flip-flop Fred, man. That's that flip-flop Fred right there.
I was really actually pretty excited because I've always thought, well, he's pro-business, and I know he's not anti-climate change. So we're going to have both of those things moving forward. We'll have a 21st century economy. We're going to be building clean energy, renewable energy projects, and people are going to get jobs, and we're going to get the economy moving again. And for 6 years, just nothing, right?
Yeah.
Crickets. Not actually, it's worse than crickets. He just doubled down on fossil fuels, and that's really what laid the groundwork for me.
And as an important side note, y'all at home, Jane Meyer, Dark Money. Look at Fred Upton. His pivot on climate change had a lot to do with how he was spooked by Koch brother money. But
spooked or spoon-fed?
Well, no, they were like, we will primary a hardliner against you unless you do what we say about climate stuff. And,
Doug, when he voted against net neutrality and over 85% of Americans want net neutrality, I'm like, come on, son. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Ed Lover when you need him? Where's the sign? Come on, son. Out of here with that garbage.
Okay, so I guess. I mentioned I'll ask a foreign policy question. I guess.
Let's talk about some foreign policy.
Yeah. And I think what I'll start with is I also remember seeing past forums with all the candidates, and you're basically you all have a very similar opinion. The military budget is too big. We could be reinvesting some of that at home. Now, here's what I want to ask. What would you do to rein in the military budget, and also understanding that this is a bipartisan consensus in Washington. This isn't just the Republicans are pumping all this money into the military-industrial complex. Most of the Democrats are doing it too. So how would you also appeal to your fellow Democrats to try to kind of wean us off of such a war-based economy?
Yeah, well, actually, I'm glad you pointed that out because as you referred to it as the military-industrial complex, and I presume you probably know that comes from Eisenhower's farewell address, right?
Yep. And
you may also be aware that in the original draft of the farewell address, it was the military-industrial congressional complex.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. It's not just Republicans. It's also Democrats. A lot of it stems from the era when there were earmarks, and so kind of those are kind of baked into the cake, if you would. So it's absolutely a big issue. And it's absolutely not an issue that is, just simply red versus blue. And so I do take it as a big, as a major project to take on. And honestly, if I am not joined by other Democratic and hopefully Republican congressmen from around the country that are like mine, that do we really need to be 10 times bigger than all of the rest of the defense departments in the rest of the world? I mean, would 8 not be enough? And with just that, that factor of 2 there, we could fund an awful lot of the programs that we all want to see.
Oh, that's true. And going along with that too, our military interventionism. I mean, we could go all the way back to the 50s and the CIA, or even before that. Smedley Butler talking about being a hired gun for the United Fruit Company. But is there what would be your standard for foreign intervention? And do you feel that America has really maybe gone too far pushing our military to, intervene in other countries, and perhaps sometimes more for profit than really like self-defense.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question in my mind that we've gone too far way too many times. It should really be an imminent threat to us. And as I think you probably are well aware, there have been a number of wars that we've entered which are strictly because of oil. Right. And, it's not a totally irrational thing. We need to make sure that we have secure energy sources. But I think a much better way to make sure we have secure energy sources is to grow clean, renewable energy sources here. Right.
You can't possibly be going against the offensive wars on countries that didn't attack us. you can't possibly be talking about.
Are you talking? Yeah, absolutely. I am. And honestly, it's a little bit scary that we now have a John Bolton is in there in the administration because, as far as I know, he still thinks the Iraq War was a great idea, and that's just a definite worry that we have to be cognizant of.
Right. Lawrence, do you have
I got my foreign policy questions have more to do with our escalating tensions with North Korea and Russia. For those who do not know, we have American troops in the Black Sea right now, which I feel is one of the dumbest things that we could have, in my personal opinion. I wanted to ask you about how do you feel about the whole Russia pro narrative, the whole Russia narrative that you see in mainstream media a lot when it comes to our country and when it comes to dealing with like North Korea and Russia, like those conflicts that are going on right now.
So I'm not 100% sure what you're asking.
Like for example, for the question that I'm asking is like, you see a lot on the news about our president, and he's a Manchurian candidate. He's Putin. He's Putin puppet type
Siberian
of thing.
candidate.
Yeah, Siberian candidate. Right. So I wanted to get your impression on this scandal, the Robert Mueller investigation, that whole deep dive, and how the Democrats are attacking Trump. If you were in Congress, how would you deal with that whole narrative, and how would you deal with our international policies when it comes to dealing with?
Yeah, so I think that we have to have kind of different kind of laws where the Congress passes a law, and then part of the law is to basically say that, and the administration actually has to do this. And you just can't imagine that we'd ever have to have a law like that, but we absolutely do have to have laws where we are literally forcing the administration to do to follow up on what we're asking, on what we're putting into laws. And until the Mueller investigation comes out, it's a little frustrating for me because I kind of grew up in the Watergate era, when everything was played out day by day, and everyone in the country had the same information that like within days anyway of what the staffers on the congressional committees had. But I think we have to wait and see what Mueller comes up with. But clearly there are things to be concerned about, and we need to make sure that we don't have a president that's kowtowing to Russia.
So if I could ask a campaign question. So what is your overall or overarching campaign strategy, and how do you think that makes you the best equipped, the best suited person with the best chance to actually take out Fred Upton in November?
Yep. So this is the other part of, Lawrence, the other part of the question that you asked me about, why did I get involved? So after the last election, I did what I've been doing for 20 years, and that is I build a forecast model for what it would take in this case. Usually it's pharmaceutical or diagnostic companies that I'm making forecast models, but for this one, it's a political forecast model. And I look to see what it would actually take to win this election. And what it would take is turning out all the Democrats we can possibly imagine, and then getting some of the moderate Republicans to vote for a Democrat, in most cases, for the first time. If we don't do both of those things, then we're not going to win this election. So both of those things are really critical, and we're attacking both of those.
The other foreign policy question I would like to ask is, we've seen, and we've grown up in the era where we had foreign policy when it comes to trade deals. Our trade deals, like NAFTA, like TPP, which a majority of Democrats disagree with, and those
now.
I guess rank and file Democrats.
Rank and file Democrats. It's like this: the majority of the Democratic base did not want TPP, yet the president, who was a Democrat at the time, was pushing for it. So, how when it comes to international trade deals, when it comes to things like the negotiations of NAFTA and TPP, what is your stance on that?
Yeah, so first of all, trade is critical. Just ask any farmer in this area. Trade is critical. We can't, this whole idea of America first and isolationism and stuff, that's just backwards, and it'll destroy the economy. So we have to have trade. We have to have good, solid trade relationships. The problem with NAFTA, and it had the same problem with TPP, to be honest, was that there was only representation from the major international corporations, and there wasn't representation from labor. And I think it's what was missing in both of those major trade agreements was full representation from labor, so that labor's having a voice there, and that part of the negotiation is what's going to happen for the workers in the other countries once we have these trade agreements.
Right. We can't be competing with. I think the main problem that I have is that if automation's not taking our jobs and our jobs are not being exported overseas, then they're being imported to private prisons in our own country, and that's what's destroying jobs. Companies that's associated with ALEC, like Walmart, Victoria's Secret, Boeing, they're shipping their jobs overseas, or their jobs are being done by slave labor in America. So if it's not slave labor in America, then it's slave labor in other countries. I would personally like my representative to talk about those issues, or talk about that as an issue and have a solution for it.
Right. So here's what's really happened is the globalization was going to happen, but because of the nature of the trade agreements, it happened way too fast, and that's why we have this kind of schism where we have some people losing jobs from automation, but the other jobs that are disappearing are disappearing overseas at a pace that really we couldn't keep up with. And that's really what's caused the problem. And again, honestly, I just see the same solution, is that there wasn't labor voice involved in those negotiations. And labor voice in those negotiations would have slowed up the trend to globalization. Globalization is inevitable, but did it have to happen in 10 years? Maybe if it could have happened over 50 years, it would have been a lot smoother in terms of the economy.
I mean, when you talk about labor as being at the table, I mean, you see it in other countries. Nissan is a great example of that. The union lead sits in the board meetings with the CEOs of the companies, and Nissan has union factories all around the world except 3. And those 3 non-union factories are in America. Right. But another big issue is to transition to another topic is climate change. Climate change. We were just talking about how Flip Flop Freddy changed his mind when it came to the Koch brothers, and the Koch brothers don't care about climate change.
They care about it a little too much. This doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Yeah. I mean, and you see how, oh my God, the Fred Upton's stance and the things that he said after the Flint water crisis kind of pissed me off. Like it made me angry. But I want to talk about climate change. Do you have a stance on climate change? Please tell me that you believe that it's real. Like,
Okay.
Jesus Christ!
I was hoping at this point you can't get away that as
because if you don't believe that it's real. Because I was gonna say, if you don't believe that it's real, did I remind you that people were jet skiing on East Michigan a couple weeks ago?
Can I add something to that? So, as far as climate change goes, I think most Democrats would agree it's a thing, and we got to do something about it. Here's my question. Now, most scientists, including people like Bill McKibben of 350.org, all of them have been very adamant. We have to stop the extraction of fossil fuels.
Yes.
Yeah, there is still quite a lot of Democrats who are for things like fracking, extractive methods. Where do you stand on fossil fuel extraction, and what kind of legislation would you want to put through to curb climate change more generally?
Yeah, I think having really aggressive goals is the main thing, and then sticking to them. And I absolutely believe climate change is real. There is no doubt. I do not give a stump speech on the campaign trail where I don't say global climate destabilization is real. It's caused by human activity, and it's already been the major underlying cause of human disasters.
I like that destabilization. That's
yeah. I'm just happy that you just didn't say we're gonna have clean coal. We're gonna take the coal. We're gonna clean it.
We have to stop extraction. We have to start building more clean, renewable energy. And by just it's we do not have to make a false choice between our economy and our environment. That's the whole point of my campaign, really, is that we can be all about the environment and still be generating economic growth.
So like solar energy, wind energy,
geothermal, although it's further behind.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree with those. But one thing that we also have to take into consideration is factory farming. Factory farming is also adding to the warming of our planet. And I don't hear Democrats talking about that at all. And that is also a massive problem. I think the main reason why it bothers me is because there was a factory farm that was literally throwing feces in the air near the residents that lived near the farm.
That was a predominantly black neighborhood.
It was a predominantly black neighborhood. So
don't know why.
It's feces like that bothers me. that bothers me. And what also bothers me is that we don't have people talking about it. So if we're going to talk about global warming, how will you also deal with factory farming as well?
Yeah, good point. I mean, that's actually another part of my platform is even urban farming, actually, because there are successful urban farms. And honestly, one of the things I'd like to do where our headquarters are in Benton Harbor is to start a much more aggressive program of urban farming where we have farmers in the area that are willing to come in and train people. They're retired and they're looking, they're ready to help. So I think urban farming and using clean renewable energy, sorry to sound like a broken record, but wherever we can use clean renewable energy is critical. And the one thing you'll find I often talk about is that regulations are not the problem for economies in general, but we do have to be aware that for small businesses, some regulations are a problem. But even for small businesses, if it's causing damage to the environment, we still have to maintain, or to public health or personal health. Those are kind of my bright lines, that regulations, even for small businesses that impact those three things, we still have to enforce those.
Before I have to go, because I have to go before 6, but before I have to go, I do want to talk about the March for Our Lives. That was a big thing that happened over the past week. It's been talked about in the news. More specifically, gun control. in gun issues. Now, for those who are listening on the radio, let me please remind you that over 97% of the country wants universal background checks. Over 75% of the country wants to ban assault-style weapons. Over 78%, I think that was a CNN poll, wanted to ban semi-automatic weapons. So when people say that they don't want gun control on the mainstream media, that's a lie. It's an absolute lie, because numbers don't lie. Now, I do want to hear your stance on gun control. Like, what was your, what is your stance? What's your policy on that?
So, first of all, I, like almost everyone I speak to in the district, I believe that there is a constitutional right for individuals to own guns for hunting and defense of the home. Beyond that, it's up to us. What kind of society do we want to live in? And do we want to have our police force outgunned by people with assault weapons or weapons of war? I don't think so. And there's no reason under the Constitution that we can't restrict and control that kind of access. And I'll just add the other thing, and this is, as a scientist, I'm all about facts. And, one whole set of facts is what are the underlying causes, and how do we prevent gun control, and why do we really not know, factually the answers to those questions? That's because the Congress has every year, including Fred Upton, for the last 20 years, prevented the CDC and the NIH from conducting basic research into the causes and prevention of gun violence. And we need to, I know that they've just addressed, and in this last bill last week, they've clarified the language of the Dickey Amendment, which is the amendment. But honestly, the Dickey Amendment the point of it was to stop research. So if they clarified the language, I don't think they've solved the problem. It has to be repealed.
I mean, no, what they want to do is they want to do what they're doing in Pennsylvania and give buckets of rocks in classes so that they can throw rocks at school shooters. That is not a joke. That is a real thing.
I saw that.
You saw that?
Yeah. Very, very effective, except for the what have they called it, the problem that the 30 kids, because there's not enough money to pay for teachers, so you could have 20 kids. The 30 kids all going to the bucket at the same time, then they can't each get a rock. If they could all have a rock instantaneously, you've got to.
It is one.
It's one of the really bad ideas that's floating out there, right?
That in Florida wanting to arm 30,000 teachers with guns.
Yeah. So I was a teacher for 4 years before graduate school in Lansing and in Chicago, and I can tell you the most tumultuous day that we had was one of our fellow teachers was also a deputy sheriff, and one day he forgot, and he had his handcuffs on the back of his belt, and that created just tumult. I mean, all the kids were running around and going, "Oh no, he's got guns! He's got!" And I just can't even imagine if there was actually a gun there. It's like,
I mean, there was a teacher who barricaded himself in a school and shot at the principal.
Yeah. So I actually have a question, and we should probably. I'll tell you. Nora, did you have anything to ask?
Sure, very quickly.
Oh yeah.
We also have Nora in the building.
Yeah.
They just walked in.
I'm thinking maybe like two more, and then we should probably wrap it up. Just out of all the candidates are arranging maybe 30 minutes to an hour. So
Well, hello. It's Nora again.
Hey, Nora.
She, her. Yeah. So I guess we were talking about healthcare earlier. I heard it on the radio on the way here. Yeah. But there's something specific I want to ask in the realm of healthcare. Now, there's been a lot of discussion over what systems we want and what we feel like could work best. But I'm asking you today about trans healthcare specifically. Now, unfortunately, a lot of things that would be covered by insurance for trans healthcare would be considered quote-unquote cosmetic. This includes top surgery for trans men, maybe facial or voice surgery for trans women, electrolysis, and all these things you have to go through these crazy kind of insurance hoops just to get. And I'm lucky enough that I finally got that with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Gretchen Whitmer's little friends. Yep. But I wanted to ask, would you promise to mandate that health insurance companies cover for trans healthcare, even if it's considered cosmetic, considering that's a huge part of dealing with gender dysphoria?
If for any legitimate health reason, I think that we would. I'll come back to the word mandate, but I'll just say mandate now. Treatment, right? That has to be provided. My preference would be that it's not mandated, that the public option, which is out there, is providing it, and that puts a marker in the marketplace, and so the insurance companies, the private insurance companies, have to live up to that. That would be my preference for how to handle it, as opposed to actually mandating. I think, every time you have a mandate, it does create unintended consequences, and if we can avoid it, I would rather do that. But ensuring that there would be coverage for that is, I would definitely ensure that.
Okay, so there would be coverage for those things under whether we still have Obamacare or public option or single payer?
Yep, and honestly, just more broadly, for mental health issues, and we need to have parity for mental health and behavioral health issues, and more generally.
All right. I did want to follow up on on your response earlier about campaign strategy, and you talked about the necessity of appealing to moderate Republicans, and I believe it was Chuck Schumer who said during the 2016 election, for every far left person we lose, we'll get 2 moderate Republicans in the suburbs. So I'm a little nervous about that, only in so much because. How are you going to appeal to those moderate Republicans? Because I think there is a way to do it, but what is the wrong way to do it, and how are you specifically going to appeal to those folks without compromising on policy details? Yeah,
well, I'll just take universal health care as an example, and Lawrence was actually referring to this. I think a big important issue is decoupling employment from healthcare, and that is something that even small businesses, they don't like having to have the responsibility for healthcare, and so I think there's some commonality there, and that's the kind of thing that I would say that I would look for, those kinds of commonalities where the solution meets both of our goals, basically. And honestly, just to be clear. I am absolutely certain that I will not get all moderate Republicans to vote for me. But I will be hard-pressed to imagine that there are many Democrats that wouldn't vote for me.
Okay, great, Rich. And I guess, anything to say and closing up before we wrap up the interview here?
Well, I'll just say that as your congressman, I'll really be focused on working hard every day to build a 21st century economy that works for everyone. And I literally mean everyone. It's not just an economic issue, but it's just a social justice issue as well. And protects our planet. Climate change is real, just in case Lawrence forgot, and provides for universal health care, because I think universal health care is an integral part of a future economy.
Oh, and I guess one last thing is we asked this last week with the first candidate, but should you not, if you don't move on to be the candidate in the general election, is there someone who you feel, is kind of, who would you vote for if, say, you were not currently running for Congress?
Who would I, of the other candidates?
Of the other candidates, yes.
I'm going to not answer that question.
Right,
but I will support whoever the Democratic candidate is, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Rich. I want to thank you for coming on the program. You can find Rich, his campaign, on Facebook. And do you have a website?
Yep, of course, richeichholz.com. The only thing is, it's EICHH. There are 2 H's in my name, right together, OLZ. So richeichholz.com.
All right. Well, thank you again so much, Rich. And we're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we'll be we got a lot to talk about. The March for Our Lives. That legislation you were showing me the other day, Nora. Oh, man. Anyway, you listen to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Wider is proud to be supported by Pedal Bicycle. Pedal Bicycle has 2 locations on 611 West Michigan Ave and 185 Romans Road. More information can be found at pedalbicycle.com.
But I got to be in a movie. I had a small scene in the movie. But I got to act with Peter Frampton. He was in the movie. And we had to smoke pot for our scene. But it was fake pot. Do not buy pot on a movie set. But I got to smoke fake pot with Peter Frampton. That's a cool story. It's as cool as smoking real pot with a guy who looks like Peter Frampton.
WIDR.
I've done that way more.
Your only source for non-commercial radio.
Now stay away from me, Frampton. I ain't got to say to you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. So, we just had Mr. Rich Eichholz on, and why don't we talk about the big thing that happened over the weekend with the March for Our Lives. I think in particular, mainstream media, a lot of people have been, covering this. So we really want to hone in on just kind of some of the things about the march that I haven't seen a lot of people talking about. And, one of those things is, I've seen, there's criticisms from the left and the right. And a lot of them have to do with, these kids somehow being ignorant in their message. And I think it's not only kind of insulting, but you're obviously not actually listening to what these kids are saying. And what I mean by that is, there's criticisms, say, talking about how it's like, oh, well, these Parkland kids, and I respect what they're doing, but you don't see this kind of same attention get brought to issues around, say, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, when they happen, by the mainstream media. However, you look at one like how this has been orchestrated nationally by these mass shooting survivors, and even particularly in Kalamazoo. And there is a deference to intersectionality. There is, they talked about, there's a columnist who talked about how he kept trying to interview these kids, and they kept deferring to go talk to a young woman of color, or go talk to a trans person, or go talk to somebody who does not have white privilege. There is an awareness of that kind of deficit in how those issues are covered. And what impressed me most about these kids is that it wasn't just a very simple thing where they're gumming up and being like, we need gun control now. They talked about state violence. There was a kid at the Kalamazoo March who name dropped the military-industrial complex. Like, whoa. And again, talking about like the systemic violence in impoverished communities that happens because of guns. Not just people getting shot up in schools, but the people who have to walk in fear because their neighborhoods have a lot of crime, and they don't just say like, oh, we need to reduce crime by banning guns. They talk about the actual systemic economic problems that lead to these neighborhood violence. So I guess I could gush more and more about how woke these kids are, but I was wondering if you had do you have something to say about that, Nora? I don't want to just speed up the whole time.
It was something that they were criticized about before, like early on, being these sort of mostly white suburbanite kids talking about gun violence, but you wouldn't hear enough of their message specifically about these more intersectional topics on mainstream media or even a lot of social media filter bubbles. But now that it's starting to pop up now, and even in the marches themselves and the speeches of both the local and the national ones, then it's really getting that message out there, just how much gun violence affects those more marginalized than them, and just how much it goes into the war machine, the police state, oppression of communities of color, stuff like that. And yeah, I'm glad that this sort of discussion is getting more fleshed out, because our so-called gun debate we've had in this country, it hasn't really felt like a debate. They're like, oh, they're taking our guns. Like, oh, you don't care about children getting killed. Like, it's not a debate. Like, it's not. It hasn't been, and at least maybe until very recently.
Yeah, but no, I hear you on that. And like one of the interesting things about the quote unquote debate is like they keep putting words in these kids' mouth, and even more than ever, because I mean, here's the thing with the NRA. We talked about this before. Is like they are not a collective of gun owners. They are not like the gun safety organization they used to be. They are the lobbyist arm of the gun manufacturing industry, and as such, they're going to treat any call for sensible gun reform as they're trying to take away all your guns. Go run to the gun store to buy them all before they get taken. Wink, wink.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Andy. I sat in for that interview with Rich. For anybody that doesn't know, I was kind of in the background, but Lawrence was on the mic. Yeah, I mean, with the NRA, like, with this debate on guns, like, I would like to see kind of people meet sort of in the middle. Like you said, you've got, the NRA has its stance, the left has its stance. Like, what I really want to see is I want to see, like a discussion on bump stocks, or, kind of things where we can really, just those small wins where we can meet in the middle on. Because,
And
I might argue that we're even already there on some level, because if people actually sit down and talk to each other rather than, yelling at each other on Zuckerbook back and forth.
Zuckerbook.
That's what I'm calling it nowadays. Then like people realize that they agree more on these than they thought. Like, people who have a history of domestic abuse should not buy guns. People should not be able to get these weapons of war. People should have background checks at least 3 days. You shouldn't buy a gun if you're younger than 21. These are positions that the vast majority of people on both sides, so to speak, of the debate are more than likely to agree on. But even a lot of NRA members themselves are on board for these, but there's a difference between the individual NRA members who might not necessarily be aware that the organization they're a part of has become this, I don't want to say monolithic because, difference between the members and their establishmentarian hierarchy. But
the kind of, to give the NRA sort of a voice, not saying that, I'm necessarily pro-NRA, but to kind of play devil's advocate here, I can see where they're coming from when, they're going to kind of fight against these, small wins for the left because the way they see it is, you give an inch, they're going to take a mile, They may say, it's just bump stocks or I think bump stocks need to go. Obviously, that's
even the orange one agrees with that.
Yeah. So the thing is, though, that Rich brought up an outgunned police force, and I can understand where he's coming from on that. But at the same time, there's countries around the world that, a dictator came to power. The police force basically was the muscle. Yeah. And so that's where I've got to kind of disagree with Rich on that a little bit because I'm not saying that people should go out and own, hand grenades or whatever, but there's other countries where we've seen that police force have total power.
That's true, and we were just talking about it earlier. The Alton Sterling is back in the news. Who was the gentleman shot in his backyard?
No idea. I may have seen something.
It's happened too many times.
The police, they were chasing some other fellow. Helicopter went over his backyard. He was just in his backyard on a cell phone. Police are boom.
Yeah, that's horrible.
And was that the one where he got shot 20 times recently?
Yes.
Oh man, that video was chilling, more than most.
I want to commend though, the kids who they did talk about state-sanctioned violence, and I think there is a problem because one, the March for Our Lives, they don't have a unified message, but I think that critique needs to be in there because our police are way too militarized and they have access to arms that we talk about how civilians shouldn't have access to AR-15s,
police tanks and all that.
Yeah, it's why do police need that? They really don't. Also bring up, it's interesting. I'm glad that you brought up kind of the partisanship of it because I think we're trained to view this issue in such a binary way. That's what keeps people from having a real conversation or debate about it. It is a very nuanced issue, and it needs a nuanced solution.
Right.
It's funny. I was talking to I think it was the organizer for the NRA chapter here on campus, and the idea that there was such a thing as a pro-gun left, he was very confused. What? I start talking about groups like Redneck Revolt and the Socialist Rifle Association, and it was very
pistols.
Yeah. It's the idea that it was really funny to see Wayne LaPierre talk a few weeks ago about how all these Marxists and communists want to take away your guns. I'm most of the Marxists and communists I know want a well-armed working class. I don't know if you actually listen to them. I think that's some nuance that needs to be, that a lot of people on the left need to understand too, because there's been a lot of times where gun control has been used against the left. The best example I can think of that is a lot of the genesis of modern gun control didn't come from a liberal think tank. It actually came from Ronald Reagan and the conservatives in the California state legislature as a response to Black Panthers who decided to open carry. So, I think that kind of cross dialogue needs to happen because, as I learned that day, a lot of people on the right, they have no idea that that's part of their history or are part of our history. Go ahead.
That's an important point you bring up too, because I'll admit sometimes I've thought about arming myself in case of hate crimes because women like me are much more likely to get shot or stabbed at night. And will it make myself safer? Maybe, maybe not, because statistically owning a gun is actually a lot less safe for you and the people in your household. But
I would disagree with that. I would say that depending on who you are, if you're a completely rational, mentally capable person, and you have it locked up, that's another big thing too.
Oh yeah.
If you don't have it locked up, obviously that's just not good. But anyways, continue. As you were saying.
Yeah.
You were saying that as a trans person, owning a gun might actually make sense for you because
because I'm more likely to be a target of violence than a lot of other folks who just might think the government's after them, which the government is after you, but in different ways, believe me. Another thing that as comes up is these topics like protecting ourselves from hate crimes, having other ways to defend yourselves. For some reason, I don't remember if this is still the case, but are brass knuckles illegal?
Yeah, they are.
Really?
Yeah, I know there was a guy when I was in high school that he had a belt buckle that was brass knuckles, and he got...
And actually, and this is really terrible, certain kinds of mace and pepper spray are illegal on campus. Yeah.
You're kidding.
Yeah, but you're not giving people a non-lethal option to deal with.
What about a right to carry brass knuckles? What about a right to bear a mace? What about our right to bear swords? What if we
One interesting thing, too, that I want to bring up is so a lot of people like to point to Australia as being this shining light of a place that got rid of its guns, and they haven't had a mass shooting since 2003 or something?
I believe so, yeah.
It was something in Tanzania had happened, and then after that they put in some legislation. And from what I understand, it was if we took that route of okay, there's a massive buyback of guns in the United States, and I'm just kind of playing I know you guys have seen that, or you've demonstrated your opinion that maybe guns aren't totally, we shouldn't completely get rid of them. You guys see the rational take on it, but people like to point at the fact that they haven't had a mass shooting since 2003. But the thing that they're not telling you about that as also is that their murder rate during that period of time, and our murder rate during that same period of time, ours has actually fallen faster than theirs, and we have as many guns as there are people in this country. So, and also, they only had 3 million guns, I think, and the United States has 300 million, and we also have people in this country that wouldn't really be willing to give them up, and I don't see it really being feasible, and that's why I think we need to kind of have those. We need to meet in the middle because it's just.
Oh yeah, and I think a lot of people do need to go back and do understand. While there's a lot of constitutional scholars will debate back and forth on this, but there was a legitimate component where the founding fathers. Part of the reason they wanted a well-regulated militia, this doesn't really get talked about, is they wanted a regulated militia instead in place of a national army. They were actually, the founding fathers, and I'll criticize them for a lot of things like the racism and all that stuff, but they were anti-imperialistic. They did not want America to turn into an empire. So they wanted a non-government citizens to be armed specifically for that purpose. I wanted to talk a little bit too about the actual local march here in Kalamazoo.
When did this take place?
Oh, it was Saturday afternoon. Yeah,
nationwide. It was all on Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
I believe their numbers of it actually, did it top the women's march, or was it some of it around the same?
Based off what I was seeing, it looks like it was close at least.
Yeah.
It's hard to say for sure.
And the thing with these mass mobilizations, and okay, I'm gonna spill some beans here on the show. There were some things about the march that I wasn't really happy about, and this is some kind of behind the scenes stuff.
I
got reached out to by ProKZoo, which a lot of you know. They are a very large organizing group here in Kalamazoo, and we've criticized them before, made our little jokes, centrist KZoo, and they do a lot of good stuff. They've done a lot. They've helped organize a lot of important rallies around DACA. A lot of the anti-Fred Upton rallies, a lot of the pop-up rallies around healthcare and stuff. And they've held educational seminars on certain specific issues. However, there was a communication breakdown, and there was a potential for. So we've been. From what I was briefed by one of the organizers, ProKZoo, was that there was potentially going to be this group there of open carry activists led by a guy named Mike Warren. Now, I did a little bit of research on this guy, and from what they told me themselves, in a very blasé manner, was that this was a man who frequented white supremacist chat rooms. Now, there's a big difference between like an NRA or a Republican open carry group and somebody in a group led by somebody who hangs out in white supremacist chat rooms and actually sends threatening videos to members of Pro-K-Zoo, specifically of them making ammunition. So like vaguely threatening videos. So that's an elevated level of risk compared to, say, just college Republicans or the NRA or even just any other open carry group. So I made a few suggestions. You should probably have like a mental health counselor on hand. What's your communication with the police like, et cetera, et cetera. And
this was specifically for the event?
This was specifically for the Kalamazoo March. And what I heavily recommended is, before the march starts, let them know there might be an open carry group up ahead. There are resources. There are mental health staff on hand if you need them, etc. I'm a big believer. It's like, I've helped organize stuff like this. You need to communicate risk and in the situation with people before they march. And just as they were before marching, they said there are going to be people along the road who disagree with us. And they were referring to like the college Republicans and NRA who were just kind of out there with signs, but no mention of the open carry group and no mention of the mental health staff. Now, I don't blame any of the kids for this or even some of the Pro-K-Zoo organizers on the ground, but the person who I was communicating with, Jex Judd, did not relay that information in a proper fashion, did not say that this is something that needed to be said at the rally before the march started. And so I was left to I ran ahead of the march to make sure that open carry group wasn't anywhere up ahead because the marchers had not been briefed or mentally prepared for that eventuality. Now, luckily, this open carry group did not show up, but I was honestly pretty steamed at how this was not, spoken about at the rally. And, I don't know if, I sat on this for a couple of days and I've kind of chilled out about it, but I don't know. Do you think that's an appropriate reaction to be? I really feel like this was the lack of transparency on risk and the failure to talk about that kind of support system that was there on the ground. I found that really, really disappointed and really inexcusable.
Even if the speeches and stuff of this march were intentionally intersectional, that's great. We absolutely need that. We need to make sure that these same marginalized communities who are marching with us are able to be safe because those are the ones who are going to be targeted by these kind of, white nationalist image board open carry types.
Yeah, I mean, I just find it kind of ironic, though, that so many of these, people out marching, all of these people that organize and get into these large groups, they're all protected by cops. They're all protected by someone with a gun, And for these, again, just to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit, because, why not? These image board white nationalists or whatever, they take a lot of flack, but really it's just, it's kind of Orwellian to kind of just denounce these people, and then since they belong to this group, let's not listen to them because they're just,
it's ironic. It popped in my head, just maybe we should reach out. I should reach out to some of my redneck revolt socialist rifle type people for. No, wait, they're never. It would be oxymoronic to have left-wing gun protection at an anti-gun rally. But no, I know exactly what you mean though. It's and I was actually just debating with somebody about state violence, and at the same time it's you need police protection and whatnot, and the irony is it's even if you wanted an alternative to the cops, some sort of armed left-wing presence, that would be completely inappropriate for that kind of march.
But I'd still exactly it would be just a paradox completely. But if I saw, like Antifa will get a lot of attention and whatnot. Even if I saw armed Antifa members, I personally would be like, oh, okay, they passed whatever kind of background check it took to get a gun. If I saw some Antifa guys open carrying, I would be kind of nervous slightly because I'm like, hey, maybe they would do something, but at the same time, somebody who's going to go open carry like that, I'm not really worried about. Yeah. The ones that worry me are, the cops that get through the system and they're,
Oh, yeah. And we've reported on the show that there are a lot of white supremacists who infiltrate law enforcement.
That was one of the things that, I didn't like so much about the march. A lot of the people who were marching were, thanking the police officers for blocking the roads for them. And I get it, from a purely constitutional standpoint, the police officers at this march were doing what they were supposed to do. They were protecting free speech. They were protecting people from getting run over and shot. That's overall a good thing. But the police and our police system is still a huge perpetrator of gun violence in America. And it comes off to me as a little bit tone deaf to treat them like the good guys on this march. It's even if it was, discussed.
In general, I'd say that they are the good guys, though. I know that there's many, many, many instances of where they're not the good guys. And, you get the psychopaths that want the authority. I'm not saying that cops are psychopaths. I'm just saying that, you get, there's a lot of good cops, and then there's a very small minority of bad cops, and that gets publicized to the point where we see the bad.
Just real quick, so this reminds me of a little thing that happened on my Facebook a couple days ago.
Oh no!
It was a picture of if nobody understands ACAB, what that stands for, all cops are something I can't say on the radio, and that's a kind of a common lexicon thing for a lot of radicals and stuff. And I recently got into a big discussion about this, and it's interesting. We talk about this on the show a lot, and I think what you need to make the distinction is some good people do become cops, but systemically, this policing in this country has inherent violence, inherent racism, inherent complicity. Unless you're gonna be some kind of Serpico that goes in the department and tries to expose corruption and probably gets tossed out or killed, you are in whatever way complicit to those colleagues who do not have those same standards as you. So, okay, Nora.
Yeah. One more thing I want to do to tie in this whole thing with tying in our mass shooting problem in the police is that we, as a country, overproduce weapons. That's a big part of why we have over-militarized police and these mass shootings in the first place. There was a recent interview that I think it was yesterday. It was on my birthday. Happy birthday to me. Chelsea Manning came on. My personal hero, Chelsea Manning, went on Democracy Now! And spoke about this great machine of death. Can we play that interview?
Oh, yeah, sure. Actually, well, why don't we take a quick break, and then I'd like to play that too, because I listened to that interview. It was pretty dope.
It's powerful.
All right, we will be right back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in the Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
Interested in underground hip-hop. Here is a complete disc jockey show with all the modern pace of today's exciting radio.
Listen here on
Saturday night
from 7 to 10.
You can't go wrong. There's one important element missing, however. That's you.
Hip-hop ethics show.
Saturday night.
I mean, DJs bring me young, play that real live show. The hip-hop ethics show.
I know you're gonna do it.
Yo, I'm talking about the hip-hop ethics show. The DJs bring me young. Transmitting live.
Saturday night.
WIDR Kalamazoo.
Keep bouncing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please stand by.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution. So, I'm sorry. Did we want to play a little bit of Chelsea Manning or get on this?
Let's do it.
All right.
Yeah, you hyped it up.
So, yeah. I almost forgot to do that. So, we want to play this clip. So, Chelsea Manning just did her first long-form interview
on live TV.
Since she got out the pokey and since she declared herself as a candidate in the U.S. Senate race in Maryland. And, you know, it ties into a lot what we've been talking about culturally. So we wanted to play a bit of a clip from that. Then we're going to hop onto a new topic. But this is some powerful stuff. Listen up.
Paying attention to, that it wasn't, that I didn't notice, and I'm just realized, oh, I'm here with people who haven't been charged with anything at all.
You know, when we were covering your trial, it was very difficult. We hadn't heard your voice in 3 years.
Yep.
Very difficult when we were able to surreptitiously get audio of you giving your statement in the courtroom.
Right. You know, and all that is in the record. It's all that is available. I mean, I'm really more here to discuss, you know, like my policies and positions, because, you know, like, I was held in prison. I was held in prison in Maryland, but I lived in Maryland prior to going into confinement, and seeing. And is it a surprise that, you know, that a national security apparatus and a criminal justice system would try to block access to a record of trial, or access to a trial, or access to somebody like me who stands up and says, I need to do something? You know, I think that. And I'm still driven to stand up and do something, and that's one of the reasons why I've decided to run in Maryland. You know, and I can
talk about that, about your decision to run for political office.
Right. You know, I thought I was done. I thought, okay, like I can go home now, but I don't feel like it's this. I mean, in this environment, in this place, this time that we're in is what I feared because I saw, you know, and I've realized it's expanded more and more that, you know, it's not just the military, it's not just the intelligence community, it's police, it's the justice system, it's immigration, like all these systems are overlapping and they're suffocating people deliberately and methodically over over decades, and this has been a continuing, like people have been building this whirling death machine of power for decades now. And you can focus in on a particular war or a particular moment or a particular controversy, but it's the overwhelming awe of the giganticness of this system that has driven me to try to fight back. And we need to start, we don't need to fix these systems. We need to stop them. We need to push back on them, whether it's immigration or whether it's the military or whether it's, the intelligence apparatus, because they're all a part of the same system. And people are suffering, and we can't wait. We can't wait anymore. We can't wait for change.
So talk about what that would mean if you became senator from Maryland. Would you pull all U.S. troops out of Iraq and Afghanistan, for example?
That's not a power that I would have, but
would you?
That's a position. That's a position. That's a position that I already hold. I already hold that. We should be. We have the largest and most powerful military in the world. We have the largest prison population per capita, if I'm not mistaken, per capita. But we have 25% of the world's prisoners, and it's always, and we have the largest and most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in the world. And yet these systems, they always want more and more and more. They're continually expanding, continually being built, and instead of slowing it down, instead it's tweaks about how big it should be or how much power we should give them between one administration or one political agency or political party to the next. And we need to roll these systems back. And whether it's U.S. troops or ICE agents or whether it's police, we're in a domestic military occupation in many of the most vulnerable communities in America. I've seen what an occupation looks like, and I walk down some streets in Brooklyn and Oakland and in Baltimore in particular, and we're living under the thumb of this enormous machine, and we need to stop it.
That's probably a good place to leave it off. But yeah, Chelsea Manning, if y'all don't know, famous leaker running for a U.S. Senate now in Maryland.
Yeah.
What exactly did she leak?
A bunch of military secrets. You can look it up. I still really need to talk about this while you have time. I can talk to you about Chelsea Manning all day. But there was this bill. There was this lovely, horrible bill that just passed very easily through Congress. Went 97-2 in the Senate, with I think one person absent, and Rand Paul and Wyden from Oregon voting no. This is FOSTA, the so-called Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. It is paired up with this other bill called SESTA. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's been immediately and fiercely critiqued by sex workers because it's going to target them, very directly, yet increasingly criminalizing them for their work. What it basically does is it makes web services criminally and civilly accountable, even retroactively accountable, for any illegal activity that happens on their service, and that includes especially sex work. This has already resulted.
Oh my God.
Yeah. This has already resulted in Craigslist Personals shutting down completely. This has already resulted in multiple safety and information resource centers for sex workers online being shut down. And what it's going to do, it's going to push those online communities into the dark web. It's going to push women, people of color, trans women especially, into who are sex workers further into desperation. Violence against sex workers is already a big problem. That's a big reason why we have this multifaceted issue with the epidemic proportion of trans women of color dying. It's hard for me to really emphasize how bad.
So you think that the sex industry should be out in the open? People should have,
It's basically a bodily autonomy thing. But the fact that this is also kind of coupled with going after everything illegal that's put onto a website and making those websites accountable is super dangerous. One friend gave a specific example for groups like Black Lives Matter and other civil disobedience groups who do break the law and use these platforms like Twitter, like Tumblr, like Facebook, what have you. They could get into huge trouble from these websites because they'll want to crack down almost preemptively on anyone trying to do anything illegal.
And I do want to put a point on something too. When we're talking about sex work, I think a lot of people have a lot of preconceived notions in their head about what that entails. We're not talking about like some sort of abusive dichotomy where there's like a pimp and
are you talking like more escorts?
Like what you would see on like Law and Order. What we're talking about is, and honestly, like you probably know people in the community. I'm talking to you, the listener, who maybe engage in this kind of work. And what the internet allows is, one, independence, so that we're not talking about some kind of abusive dichotomy, and two, it involves a level of transparency that you don't get if you're the stereotypical image of like standing on a street corner, because you are interacting with someone online who most of the time has an actual profile, somebody who is accountable to that particular website. So a good example would be like Seeking Arrangement. Mm-hmm. I have people who are very close to me who do this kind of work, and this is frightening.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is really like chilling not only for those people in sex work that I care about. I should also mention that like being even a stripper or like a paid cuddler is also could fall under that umbrella. So all these industries, like these people, like mostly women, are going to like lose their paychecks for a week. They're going to be pushed out to have to do these more dangerous tasks, I should say, out in the streets. And it's much more likely that they're going to get killed or raped or otherwise harmed. And an alarming amount of our Congress just went along with it, like not even caring about the internet freedom aspect of it either. And that's just chilling because I'm just going to finish.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Because it makes me wonder if this will ever get repealed, because it was passed with such uniformity. Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? Like, there's never this much of a bipartisan consensus unless we want to build a huge bad word load of bombs. Like,
well, I think there's still such a notion amongst like, it's almost a generational thing. All sex work is bad. All sex work is somehow abusive and wrong, and we shouldn't let it happen. And what they're doing is the modicum of safety that has come up for people who want to engage in this work that they get from using these online websites has been stripped away. So you are simply making it more dangerous for people who are already engaging in this kind of work.
One other thing that it's interesting that the timing of this, because this happens right around the same time the Trump administration is trying to push for another trans military ban, which we already know is more about just trashing on minorities because Trump's not going to deliver on populism and to not like trans people in public spaces, but that's a whole other discussion. What I'm saying is that the military and sex work are sometimes, not always, but that sometimes they're last resort options for these intersectional underclass folks to find a way out. And if they can't go to either of those, then they can't pay their rent with Walmart. Like maybe they can't even get a job there, so it's entirely likely they'll get killed if they don't do it themselves. And it's heartbreaking, and it's horribly offensive that so much of the Democrats in Congress just went along with this. But yeah, I don't really have any good news about this.
I don't know. It's tough to be a politician and to be pro, website that's going to, help stimulate the sex industry. It's hard to be a politician and come out and say that.
Well, I definitely say, especially in our modern, modern political climate. Yeah. I mean, that's why I say it's so generational, because it's only really among millennials and Gen Z that you're starting to see a different conception of what sex work is and can be. And it's sad too, because you're right, Nora. I don't see there being an immediate or even near-term solution or at least even critique of this problem, because even among all the progressives are running, they don't have sex work isn't really part of their platform. it's something they're not really comfortable talking about. And if they do, it's probably going to be along the same kind of conceptions and platitudes that older politicians are going to have about it.
So, if it's all right, I'd like to wrap up the show with the time we have talking about what this means further for the digital rights movement. Now that this finally Cambridge Analytica story went viral.
Finally,
waiting a whole year. Now people might start to care. Mm-hmm. So we couldn't stop SESTA because it happened way too fast and people didn't even know about it. Most progressives didn't even know about it. We almost maybe saved net neutrality. Maybe it wasn't possible. Who knows? Yep. But this is a sign digital rights have gotten way worse way quickly. Even Google and Facebook themselves are using their algorithms to bury anti-establishment opinions, and you can see it happening to these channels, the adpocalypse. And the status quo before then has already been bad since 9/11 with these deals like Prism and Five Eyes between tech corporations and states to basically do surveillance on us to quote unquote look for terrorism or just to sell our data to advertisers. Now, there's been a lot that's been brought back up that specifically I'm going to focus on Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. Now, I'm sure Apple does plenty of this too, and other of the similar companies like Twitter, what have you. But these are the ones that are especially scandalous in terms of privacy. Now, Google can collect sometimes a lot of seemingly innocuous data like emojis you've used, and a lot of these things are still interconnected because a lot of these sites have contracts with each other. Now, let's go over very quickly what the kind of data Google hoards about you. Is all on an average of about 5.5 gigabytes, which is 3 million Word documents of data on us. It'll include the locations of your past 12 months, including what route you took between them and how long it took, your search history on all your separate devices. Even if you delete them, you'll have to delete it separately. Demographics in order to target you for ads, whether you're a woman or whether you might be overweight or something like that. Every app you use, they can use that info to sell to ads. All your YouTube history, this one's especially chilling. Every text message and call that you get, Google and Facebook, there's a good chance they know about it.
That's right. Yeah. The what is it? Kind of the hidden read-only logs that they just found.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep, that's what I'm talking about. Where else? It of course will put together your interests as well. It's also also worth bringing up that Windows and Facebook will collect basically the same data, but with varying degrees of similarity. Sometimes they focus on other stuff. Interestingly enough, Google does collect every time you log into Facebook and every Facebook sticker that you use in a chat, interestingly enough. Windows 10 is, as an operating system, this is coming from somebody who's used Windows nearly my whole life, has 16 different sub-menus in their privacy section with all the defaults setting you to data sharing. And even when you bother to turn all of them off, they're still giving a lot back to Microsoft servers. So if you're using Windows 10, you don't have a lot of secrets, I'm afraid. And of course, all of this is going to the NSA as well, and the entire executive branch has access to this, which is why, shortly after Trump got elected, I was really sounding the alarm about this because I didn't want Mike Pence or Steve Bannon to have access to all my data.
That's right.
Chilling.
Now, did you feel the same way during the Obama presidency, though? Or has that changed now that Trump is president? It's
kind of like that. The Trump election was a wake-up call to everybody. We really shouldn't have been okay with our data collection under Obama or Bush before this, but because Trump is kind of a maniac fascist who brings more of those types with him, that's somebody you especially don't want to give that kind of surveillance powers to. And also ties back to my transness because it's affects so much of my life as is. I already feel like I'm often under a lot of prying eyes and stares, even in the public life. In the digital life, that's something I've been more aware about. Now, a lot of people will tell me that they don't care. Oh, all of our data is being collected. So what? I have my platforms. I have my phone. I'm able to do what I want. But earlier, it would have been unheard of for somebody to carry around a corporate government, camera microphone in their pockets at all times, but people are buying a new one every year. Now, even then, trying to protect yourself from this kind of surveillance is not very accessible. You have to have you have to do a little bit of research. However, thankfully, most of it you can find in one website. Go to privacytools.io. I would encourage people to seriously consider reclaiming their data, reclaiming their spaces online, and maybe if you can't delete Facebook, then go off it for about at least a month. I know I'm going to try to shortly after my birthday party, that is. You know how that goes. But yeah, I understand like this can be difficult to do with, like just having to reorganize your stuff, maybe buy new devices, and you don't have to. I understand, but be cautious is what I'm saying. We are living under the eye and the thumb of, as Chelsea Manning put it, this whirling death machine, and the corporate state will stop at nothing to sell you ads or dumb you down.
I think like the best way to really approach it, because I've had friends who talk about like, well, I'm going to leave Facebook, and I would say, particularly if you're an activist or an organizer, don't do that, because that's how the normal people find out about all of the military-industrial complex and the oligarchy and all that stuff. If everybody just goes to MeWe, for example, then we're just going to be kind of isolating ourselves. I would say just whenever you're using a platform like Facebook, and this is what I do when I use it, just be conscious that everyone in the world can see it. The FBI can see it. The CIA can see it. All the nefarious corporations that you don't like they will take a look at it if they feel so inclined. So just keep that in mind when you are posting stuff on Facebook. There is no real expectation of privacy because this corporation is selling out your private information for profit, and they have been for a long time.
Oh yeah, this is nothing new. When I saw Mark Zuckerberg's apology, that I can't watch that apology without bursting out into laughter. Oh, yeah. we protect everyone's data. Oh man,
that's a good one.
Don't buy it. But another thing I'll mention is with those platforms like Facebook and YouTube that could bury your stuff under algorithms. Be mindful of that. Maybe put some links in the comment section of that post. Maybe use replacement characters that, like, the E with the accent on it or the U with the accent on it, for example, to make that a little bit harder for them.
Yeah, and actually, I did want to we got a little bit of time left. I wanted to bounce off something you asked, like how did you feel about this under the Obama administration? I think there were a lot of people who were raising the alarms about this, particularly because, the thing that they've mostly used when they discuss it at all in mainstream channels, the surveillance state is like, well, if you're not a criminal, you have nothing to hide, or like, well, the American government is benign enough that it's okay for them to have these tools. Now, there's two things to that. One, the Obama administration was a lot more oppressive than most people realize. It's just people didn't discuss it because, he was a lot more polite.
He put a nice face to it.
The Obama administration, they prosecuted more whistleblowers than any administration before that, ramped up surveillance in a lot of fundamental ways. And let's keep in mind, like, how was that used practically on the ground? Well, he deported more people than any president in living memory. Trump's trying to catch up right now. And one of the worst things about it, though, too, was, just before Obama left office, he authorized continued investment in government surveillance. He authorized basically the building of an information, I'd call it a Ministry of Truth, but it's basically what it was. It's like a branch of the intelligence department specifically geared towards producing propaganda. And the radio show it was the last radio show we did while Obama was president, and my biggest complaint was that he is handing the Trump administration a dictator's toolkit.
Yeah,
and he did.
I'm gonna agree with you on that one.
Well, it's about 7 o'clock. Any parting thoughts?
Yesterday was my birthday, and I would just a quick shameless self plug because it's my day. Go to my Twitter at Space Queen Nora. If you can follow me if you'd like, especially since I'm quitting Zuckerbook for a little bit. Yeah. And share my transition fund if you can. I will be your best friend.
No, I'm just glad that you were critical about that. Because with the right during the Bush presidency, it was like, oh yeah, the Patriot Act, it's like gonna keep us safe, it's cool. And then during the Obama administration, there was the whole Snowden People realized the NSA was sort of doing its thing, and then people were critical of that. And now Trump is president, and now you're seeing the left again being like, "Whoa, okay."
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think like what needs to be built. Everything is put through a partisan lens, and we really got to resist that. We've got to understand that there are, George Carlin had a great joke. I always remember this. But be wary of bipartisanship, because that means both parties are coming together to screw you over. So, all right. I think with that, we're going to leave it. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. If you want to listen to our show, we put them up on YouTube every week. And, we're here every Wednesday from 5 to 7. So, I'll see y'all later. Keep on fighting for that revolution solution.